Welcome back, everyone, to another episode. I'm your host, Kate Port, and today I'm joined by Tam and Peter. Tam Ayers is our field CTO for North America, and Peter Kreslins is our CTO based down in Brazil. Welcome, guys.
Hey, nice to be here.
Hello, Kate. Thanks for having me.
Of course, always happy to have this dynamic duo, if you will, with me to talk about integration. And today's topic is going to be a really fun one because we're talking about not only what's happening today with integrations, but thinking about the future of integrations. And so for the next little while, we're going to talk first about where we are today, because you can't think about where you're going unless you know where you are. So Tam, I'm going to start with you. Tell us a little bit about what's happening today with integrations. We know that technology leaders want to have a strategy. Integration is at the top of their mind. They're looking at platforms. They're answering surveys about integration. But what do you think is really going on in the industry today? And, think about the last couple of years, if you want. I'll pass it to you first.
Yeah, excellent. Great question. And this is something that's constantly evolving, right? So from some of the different conferences that we've had the opportunity to be a part of and speak with, from our interactions with different customers and clients, and then just our own experiences, it's clear that integration is at the forefront of a lot of IT leaders' minds. The digital experience, that is demanded by, these CIOs, customers, and their employees, the demands are so high, and integration and good integration is the backing behind any of these great experiences. And so it's something that a lot of IT leaders are having to contend with. What we're seeing now is the consumerization of every single area of the business into more composable parts of the enterprise. And with that comes the dividing of those different silos that are currently being broken down by different communication and integration technologies and workflows. So what we're seeing here is a need to further integrate all of these different solutions digitally across the enterprise that used to probably solely reside with IT, that every area of the business is now becoming digital. And so with that comes this integration challenge or struggle that occurs. Instead of having and managing and getting around that versus just having all of these different point solutions, coming up with a solid strategy to manage the solutions that are here today that need to be integrated, but also the solutions of tomorrow that need to be in there to allow for a company to be more flexible, to be more resilient and adaptable, but still allowing some of that creativity to happen when the business needs to respond. So we're seeing more and more of these solutions have different APIs, but CIOs and different tech leaders are also having to contend with some of these legacy systems that maybe don't have APIs. And so this makes a real challenge and burden to be able to handle the full life cycle of all of these different integrations across the entire landscape. And so what we're seeing now is more and more technologies are coming into this space to try to make different discrete elements of that, and the different burdens of the different tasks that go into building these, collaborative integrations. We're seeing those, different technologies rise up to solve that. And our state of integration report highlights this, that majority of these leaders, I think it was 98%, had to rebuild at least one core integration in the past 12 months. So this is just showing that the business is constantly adapting, and that they need to be able to respond in a matter of days and weeks, not months and years, to these different technologies, because everything is getting more competitive. And so how CIOs are able to do that is something that keeps them up at night, to where they can go fast, but how do we also make sure that we're not breaking things? And how are we building a good structure for today that even if we had to replace something tomorrow, we're not necessarily reinventing the wheel? So we're seeing that a strategy is important, but very few have one that's resilient and adaptable enough to take them into the next generation of integrations, or the next generation of technologies that they're going to need to be successful, because those technologies look very different than what they've ever had before. So I've loved for the past years of being here, I've loved engaging with different IT leaders and helping them build out those different IT strategies to provide a level of comfort of how do we have a framework, but then freedom within that framework to be able to adapt and grow as these new technologies and hurdles come at us.
It's interesting that you reference the number of technologies and platforms that companies are using today, because I read a stat recently where every company of roughly our size, which we're under $100 million in revenue, is looking at at least 250 different tools that they're using, right? Or platforms. And so it's really overwhelming to think about how you strategically, as a technology leader, integrate all of those technologies together and make sure that they're working side by side, or if necessary, one after the other. And Peter, I'm sure you have feelings about this because that's your role, not only in what the product that we're building, but in the day-to-day of making sure that all of those technologies are integrated successfully. And we're not talking about the Slack integrations or anything we want to optimize our workflow, right? It's more than just automating connections and workflows. It's making sure that the data that you're utilizing is going to have more of an impact, right? So Tam, to your point, these systems have to be part of that strategy. And we don't know what we don't know, right? Technologists are famous for saying that when evaluating estimates, right? So I think if we were to switch gears and say, okay, let's assume that that's the state that we're in, where we're trying to define the strategy, there's a desire for that strategy, that team, that collaboration. Peter, I'm going to switch it to you. What do we think happens with this as early as next year, which is just a few weeks away?
Great, Kate. Yes. Yeah, this is happening everywhere, right? And you were absolutely right. This is happening in companies trying to differentiate and win, right? In all segments. This is happening to us, building the product that will help these organizations transform, right? So it's happening everywhere, right? And if you think about all these disparate technologies and trying to connect them back, and I love to mention that we are actually trying to connect them back, right? As we started to apply a lot of patterns in software development and how organizations evolve, giving teams the power to innovate and create and be free to do whatever they believe will give the best value to their users. At some point, these things need to connect back, right? These things need to be augmented outside the organization, right? And to be honest, and being leaders here in the integration space, and I talk a lot with them about that too, right? There is some confusion happening there, right? In one side, you have IT, right? So IT is the organization that for a long time helped the business deliver stuff. But this has also changed, right? Because the business is much more tech savvy now. They can solve problems on their own. Some business organizations have already included technical teams to be faster and really be able to deliver more value. But the reality is that in the integration space, we had a lot of confusion there. Why? Because in one side, we actually had this approach where we are actually automating stuff, as you mentioned, right? So we are connecting business processes. The tool that we love to use may be a marketing tool with the other tool that we also love to use because they're very specific, they're very good at that. We want to connect them, right? Because it makes sense for us. I'm working on my e-commerce and I want to see my orders somewhere else, right? I'm working on my leads and I want to see them on my CRM, whatever, right? So there was a huge gap there that people really wanted to cover and giving that back to IT so they could build was taking a long time. But we cannot say that IT is unneeded, that we need to get rid of them. There is a lot to happen there too. IT is transforming a lot. It's becoming much more agile, much more effective. So they also need a hand. So in the other spectrum of that thing, automation is one side. There is another side, which is how do we make them more effective? How do we tackle the low-level integration cases that require transformation in how the organization is architected, in the platforms that the organization will rely on, right? So I believe that going forward, we'll start to see that clear distinction. We'll start to see that confusion fade away. We'll start to see scenarios that are suited for specific solutions that are focused on automation and scenarios that are focused in helping IT become better, do more, help them, give them a hand so they can develop more. And that goes against what we did in the past, because integration is an old problem, right? Where we wanted, or we really pushed these teams that are completely overwhelmed to become experts in discipline that can be delivered by a platform, that can be delivered and handled, and the complexity can be abstracted away by such platforms that these teams in IT will just use. They will just rely on those things. The capability is there, but they don't need to be experts. So I believe we'll start to see a more distinction on that, a clear distinction on that for the use cases that these things will be used for. And with that, and I'm not fighting against any of. I'm not fighting against each one of them. I'm just stating that will be a clear distinction. There will be space for automation. There will be a lot of space for platforms that help these IT teams become better. That's how I am seeing that.
I think you've highlighted some interesting things, and then Tam, I'm going to let you chime in if you have anything. But when we think about there's a space for everyone at the table, I guess, is a good way to maybe think about it, where automation, yes, let's help with workflows. Let's help get your work done. Integration, yes, let's get the data from where it is to where it needs to be, usable by the right people, tools, platforms, services, because ultimately that's what's going to drive success. And I think we're going to see that shift from what you guys have talked about, not only here, but in other conversations. We're going to see that shift go from, again, this jumbled, maybe confusing space to now having clearly defined lines of where you can utilize those platforms and tools that are available today. Tam, anything to add before we wrap up?
No, I think Peter's bringing up some great points. The one thing that I'd like to say is that if you start thinking about some of the research that Gartner's put out there, and some of the different analysts have said that the future of integrations is more collaborative teams that are going to empower those collaborative integrations across the enterprise. And the next evolution beyond collaborative is self-service. So if you think about all of the talk that is happening in an organization and using communication tools like Slack and Teams and some of those things, those are seen as collaboration tools, but those are for communication, right? What about collaboration tools for work, for integration? And when you start thinking about how is work actually happening across the enterprise, it's those silos are broken down with integration. So we talked a lot about automation versus integration. To me, a part of automating a process is the integration, but there's so much more that goes into it, like process improvement, change management, et cetera, where the integration is just a necessary evil to be able to attempt to automate those processes. And so as we start to think about, well, what does that truly mean? If you start thinking about those walls of the next generation enterprise or the future enterprise, if integration is that collaborative layer, not where action is taking place, not just the talking about something, but actually doing of work and automating of data flows, then an integration is that piece that's going to connect the composable enterprise together and break down those silos that are there. So now you're more focused on the data streams and the workflow that's happening between these enterprises versus instead of those different source systems. And so a lot of the conversations that we're having with leaders aligns exactly back to this. How do we break down those silos? And then once they are broken down, what is the common bond or the interface in which work is actually going to flow across the entire enterprise? And that's integrations. So accelerating the value that you get out of your integration technology and landscape is absolutely critical. So making sure that your company is ready for the future and making sure that your enterprise, as you move to more composable business services, having the right technologies in place, no matter what language, if you will, to be able to communicate across those walls, being ready for that is absolutely critical. And aligning your tool set and your technology stack to be able to be future ready is something that also applies to that integration landscape as well.
I think, Kate, and this might be a topic for the next session. Maybe going down to the scenarios will help clarify where we believe one thing versus the other will be used, right? We are, and I am particularly looking into this platform thinking. on really being able to offer this base platform, internal platforms, if you wish, that enables these IT teams to do more. That's the focus. And these guys are really are really looking into adopting new ways of delivering products, new ways of connecting better with other teams, new ways of exposing knowledge across the organization, right? So I believe there's a lot. I don't think we have time for that today, but I believe there's a lot of things we can discuss on that matter too.
I think there's so much more on this topic and absolutely opens us up for future topics. So I'm sure I'll have you guys back on here again. Thank you so much for joining me, Peter, Tam. Thanks for your time, and we'll see you all again really soon.